Hi, I'm Jason Stahl, editor of BodyShop Business. Today's body shops are looking for ways to increase productivity, save money, while at the same time improve quality. Sometimes a review of how some of the basic processes are performed can lead to significant improvements. Today, Tim McKenney, Senior Application Engineer from Evercoat, will provide an in-depth review of the basics of mixing, applying, and sanding body filler and putty to help ensure a quality foundation for automotive paint. Tim, one of my first questions is, why do you need to clean? Couldn't you just sand off the dirt?
Well, that's a misconception actually, because what happens is the contamination that's on the surface will be picked up in the abrasives. It's a good idea to clean the entire panel. Start off with soap and water to remove all the organic things that would be on here, tree sap, road salt. Then follow that up with a second step by using a wax and grease remover to remove the wax, the grease, the silicones, because those obviously won't come up with soap and water. And I even take it one step further and say clean the whole panel. That way you can make sure you're identifying all the damage in the one process. Maybe a good opportunity for an upsell in the process as well.
I thought you had to remove the paint before applying body filler. Is that true?
Well, not necessarily. So what we're going to do for this particular scenario is I'm going to prepare this in the middle. I'm going to sand it with 80 grit, but not take off all the paint. I'm going to just go down to the factory primer, factory e-coat, and I'm going to feather edge this with 180 grit. One of the biggest benefits we have for our products is we're talking about using a premium resin that can adhere to a wider range of substrates, and it will actually stick better to a finer sand scratch. So we don't need to take it down to bare metal. That's kind of a misconception that you had to do that with the old body fillers. Well, you kind of did back then, but the resin structure on these products is totally different nowadays.
That goes back to the grinding we talked about.
Absolutely. Yeah, we talked about grinding from another scenario where over-grinding can create more of an issue for pinholes. So, for repair like this, a lot of times the go-to product might be to start with the grinder. You're actually doing more harm than good to the substrate itself, because what if this were aluminum? So what I'll do on this is I'm going to start in the area here. I'm going to sand with 80 grit just to kind of take off for the deeper areas. Say if I did have to do a stud in the middle or do some hammer and dolly work, and then I'm going to feather edge the outside up with 180 grit to get it prepared for the Rage Ultra. Now apply the product, and then we're going to sand it with 180 grit. That way we're really only going to be doing 180 grit for the majority of the preparation and sanding. It helps to simplify the process, speed up productivity, and we're going to eliminate the deep sand scratches outside the perimeter of the repair. So I'll go ahead and get started here.
Okay.
Once I start to see that I'm starting to get through the paint, that's when I want to stop, because I don't want to sand it too aggressively with the 80 grit and start to expose that metal. We do have a corrosion protection with Rage Ultra. It's got a 500-hour salt spray corrosion resistance. But if I don't open up the bare metal, I don't have to worry about the corrosion resistance. What I'm going to do in this process is I'm going to work with the factory corrosion protection on this panel to stick to that and not have to worry about having to replace it. I always say follow the vehicle manufacturer's recommendations. So if they say that they don't want that substrate for that particular vehicle sanded beyond that coarse of a grit, so say it's an aluminum vehicle and the manufacturer says we only want as coarse as 80 grit, well then we need to start at 80 grit or finer. We don't want to go any coarser than 80 grit.
Right.
So now I've got it sanded with 180 grit, but the next step I look at is when someone would try to apply the product over top of something like this. There's still some dust on this, as you can see. So if you try to apply body filler over dust, well, it's extra air. Now you got to wet the surface while you're incorporating the dust into the product. So blowing it off with clean compressed air, best option for this. We'll just go ahead and wipe this down with an alcohol wipe. The reason I like using an alcohol wipe is because the alcohol is going to flash off. It's not going to leave any kind of layer of film of solvent over the top of the repair area. It's going to flash off pretty quickly. All right, so I've got it all sanded down. So next I'm going to mix up my product, and I'm going to go ahead and put it onto the repair here real quick. It's always a good idea, even if it is a fresh gallon or it's a gallon that's been sitting around for a little bit, stir the product up. We stir our primer before we use it. We stir our clear coats before we use them. We need to stir up the fillers as well, because fillers can separate as well as anything else. And then if you notice I had the lid on here, well, we want to make sure that we put the lid back on, sealed up before we leave at night, because otherwise what happens is the product dries out. As it dries out, it's harder to work into the surface. It's harder to get the air pockets to come out, so we're more likely to get pinholes. So I usually hear more people talking about getting pinholes as the product starts to get used up, because it's drying out at that stage. So we're going to mix it up real quick. It's an Evercoat filler product. So we need to make sure we're using an Evercoat cream hardener. The product's all catalyzed at 2%. So 2% is going to be a ratio of 50 to 1. So on the top of our can, we have a little sticker that says how to mix it for a 2-inch, 4-inch, and an 8-inch puddle. So this is about a 4-inch puddle. I know that because I've got a spreader. It's about 4 inches here. So I'm going to go at least a bead all the way across, because even up to an 8-inch puddle, it's a bead all the way across.
We want to use the Evercoat product. We don't want to cocktail different products from different manufacturers together.
Correct, correct. We don't want to use a hardener from another system in a product like this and vice versa, because there is a difference in cream hardeners now. For years and years there wasn't, now there actually is. So we'll mix this up here. The most important thing to make sure when you're mixing at this stage is you put the right amount in and it's fully incorporated. We don't want to see any streaks or marbling going on, because that means those streaks have pure benzoyl peroxide, the cream hardener, and the other areas are going to be a little lighter. So we're going to have an over and under catalyzation right in the middle of the mix. We'll make sure it's evenly mixed.
And you're not putting air in there because of the technique, correct?
Correct. That figure 8 technique I was just showing a second ago is a technique I learned from a gentleman over in Germany. And he showed me that technique to help cut down on the amount of air that would be put into the product. The second little trick here, spread the product out. It's going to give you some extra work time. It's not going to be minutes, but if it's hot, it's in the middle of summer, it may give you a few extra seconds. So the number one cause of pinholes right here. Look at the surface. You can actually look and see some of the air pockets trying to work their way out. Yeah. What we want to do is wet the whole surface. We should be able to see through it. Just push the resin down into the sand scratch. This is a finer sand scratch, so it's going to be easier to fill in. But if this was a grind mark, it'd be harder to fill in. We would really have to push it down into those areas.
And you mentioned pinholes, and pinholes are really bad, but there's pinholes and micro pinholes, correct? Correct.
So if we were to try to do a heavy application over a coarse grind mark, we would have heavy pinholes. Micro pinholes can just be a result of some porosity of the products depending on the filler material that's in them. What we're using here is Rage Ultra, so this has got a very fine particle that's in the product. All right, so after I've got it all spread out, what I do is come back and spread this out and create a little bit of a bevel. The reason I want to do that is I want to make it easier to sand into that 180 grit sand scratch that I made a moment ago. So it's a lot easier to work at this stage than it would be if it were to actually harden up. So I'm going to take my alcohol wipe here and clean it up. So we're going to wait about 15 to 20 minutes. We're going to be able to sand this particular product here. Typical body fillers are going to range around that same time frame, about 15 to 20 minutes at about 72 degrees. If it's warmer, it can be less. If it's cooler, it can be a little bit longer. Work time on these products is all given at 72 degrees, so obviously if it's going to be used at a cooler temperature, it is going to take longer for it to reach a sandable stage, and you're going to have a longer work time. And likewise, if it were going to be used in the summertime and it's got a higher ambient temperature, it doesn't take quite as long for it to kick off, so it's going to be a shorter working time and a shorter sand time. We still want to stay pretty true to the catalyst rate at 2% and using the information on top of the can. Because if we go radically low, well, then we're under catalyzing, possibly. And if we go much higher, then we're over catalyzing.
Tim, I noticed you were mixing on a special sheet earlier, and I've seen body shops mix stuff on cardboard before. What was that? Well,
that was our Evercoat mixing sheet. It's a, we'll call it tear-away sheet. So as you're mixing on that paper, you tear that away and you have a new, fresh area you can be mixing your product on. Now, mixing it up on cardboard, that's an area that, I'm glad you brought that up. You don't want to mix on cardboard, and here's the reason. We want to mix on something that's non-porous and it's not going to absorb our material. You ever put water on cardboard and notice it getting darker? Same thing with the resin for this and the catalyst. So your chemicals that you have in the product are going to be absorbed into the cardboard. There's one problem. Second problem is the fibers. I've seen two scenarios where they're using an uncoated cardboard, so now the fibers of the cardboard are now in the product, and now that's going to absorb solvent. The other problem was that I went into a shop and said, well, we don't use uncoated, we use waxed cardboard. Well, now as the product's being mixed, they're pulling wax off, and now their wax is in there. Best thing to do is use a non-porous, clean substrate. So So whether it's going to be something like that, a piece of glass. When I was in the shop, I used a quarter glass out of a car. Worked for many years until it got dropped. Even a piece of stainless steel or aluminum, something like that, so it's not going to be absorbed into it. Sand it smooth, wipe it clean, because we want to make sure we're not picking up any debris off of the mixing surface. So as I go through this process, remember 80 was in the middle, sanded with 180. I'm going to start with 180. So I'm going to keep continuing with those grits and not going backwards. If I go backwards, then I got to go back and take those coarser sand scratches back out of the repair. So I don't want to have to do that. So I'll go ahead and start this off.
Tim, I noticed you got a low spot here. How can you fix that?
Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually scuff that area up a little bit to give it a little bit of a tooth for the product to stick onto, because it's unsanded Rage Ultra right there. So I want to be able to sand it, make sure it sticks to itself. So I'm just going to take some of the 180 grit, and I'm just going to scuff in that area a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply a Rage Ultra just right in that little area. Now, if this was a traditional two-step process with a putty, most technicians would apply over the top of the whole repair. The reason being, the putty sands at a different rate than what the filler does. So they don't want to sand through it. That's why they over apply. But then they got to block the repair straight 2 times. The filler gets blocked, the putty gets blocked. Since I've already blocked this straight with Rage Ultra, what I'm going to do is just spot fill that. It's going to sand at the same rate as what I've already applied. So I don't need to recoat the whole thing. I can just put it right in that little spot. So we'll just scuff in that little area, remove the dust, and mix up a little bit of product. Where I had the low spot, I filled that in. So all I really want to do is just come back with my my DA and just sand off that little bit, just leave a little bit inside of that low spot, and then we're going to be all set. So I'll sand this real quick. And again, same grit, 180 grit. That's the only grit that I've used after I feather edged my repair, and it's the same sheet all the way through this process. Okay, so there's our low spot, all filled in.
I know, Tim, we were talking about putties and fillers earlier, and if this is a filler, how are you able to do that?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, what we've done is I was talking about the differences in the resins. This particular product uses a resin we call eco resin. So it's a polyester resin, but it's blended with our own proprietary patented process of a new eco resin. The eco resin gives us a wider range of substrates, so it's able to go over top of a sanded clear coat, something that was unheard of for many fillers. We have traditional body fillers like our Z-Grip, our Rage Gold, or Lightweight. Those are meant to go over top of an 80 grit. So if I had actually done this in that process, I would have really just applied my filler in the middle, where I'd sanded with 80, applied it, sanded it with 80, and then it would have come back with the putty. Because this eco resin product works so well, and we have such a fine filler package in it, we're able to put it over top of a 180 grit sand scratch. Because we've come out with that new resin structure, we've been able to adjust the work times, like for extra and then the product like this. So it gives us a lot more versatility than what a traditional filler product might be with Z-Grip or with a traditional putty like Middle is. So I'm going to wipe this down and get the dust off of it. And then we're going to apply the 440 Express and look to see if we have any micro pinholes. All right, we're just going to put a little bit of material on here and wipe it into the repair. And then take care of them. Find them, fill them, and fix them all in one process here.
Tim, what is this product you're using right now?
Oh, 440 Express. It's a micro pinhole eliminator. We brought it out some time back to deal with the micro pinholes and micro porosities on products. As the resins have changed for a lot of the high solid, low VOC primers that were coming out there, there were starting to be some challenges for how those materials were going to work over top of some fillers. So as we started hearing about these really, really small pinholes that were really hard to see, these micro pinholes, we saw that there was a need to fill that, and it actually came out of Europe. So we came up with this product, 440 Express. We apply that product with this foam applicator pad, run it over the whole repair, and what it does is it'll help find, like we have a couple little pinholes right there. We didn't see those from before. We found them, we filled them, and we fixed them. We'd have to wait about 15 minutes to give it a light scuff with the gray scuff pad, but then after that we can take it on directly to primer.
Yep.
So the benefit for the process is I did all my filling in one application. I blocked it one time. I didn't need a putty for the repair, and I put the 440 Express over top of it to speed up the overall process for the priming. So I got this repair done. I only had this block sanded to straight this one time. So we're all about trying to make the technician's job a little bit easier and not having to work so hard with that.
Sure. Well, Tim, thank you so much today for all this information about taking us through the repair process, using Rage Ultra, and showing us that shops can really gain in productivity, throughput, and efficiency. I'm Jason Stahl. Thanks for watching.